If there's one thing the British love, it's dystopias. From 1984 to Children of Men to Love Island, our country is responsible for more than our fair share of great dystopian works. However, as much as we like dystopia, generally speaking, our politicians see it as impolite to openly say that they want you to live in one. But that's beginning to change. Figures in Reform UK, currently Britain's highest polling political party, have praised a number of foreign governments, from Netanyahu's Israel to Putin's Russia to Trump's America. But for all that praise, there's really only one government that Reform says Britain should actually copy.
Today, GB News is in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates. I'm very, very pleased that sitting before me is somebody who's part of the government, Her Excellency Reem Al-Hashimi. Thank you for coming on GB News. And we have a fascinating shared history between our countries. And it does seem to me there's actually quite a great affection for the United Kingdom amongst the people here.
There really is.
Fattah one, she highlights the Sheikh's commitment to a culture of respect, tolerance and openness.
And isn't that a great thing? Shouldn't we have respect, tolerance and openness? But at the moment...
Talk about a country that locks up political opponents.
And no one's saying everything's perfect about it.
Whilst Reform's love for the UAE doesn't tend to get much Western media coverage, they've been pretty open about it. Only last November, in an interview with Arabian Business magazine, former Reform leader and current deputy leader Richard Tice stated simply that the UK would have to emulate the UAE or go bust. A month later at a donor party in Dubai, Farage told UAE ministers, "We have a lot to learn from you, my dear sirs." Now, all of my favourite soulless internet personalities tell me that they love Dubai, but it seems a little odd for Reform UK. For a party that talks so much about Sharia law, their idol is a country where Islamic jurisprudence directly shapes legislation. So why? Why do Reform politicians love Dubai so much, and what do they mean when they say that they'll make our government more like theirs? What is the Dubaification of Britain? To find out, we need to start here. As you can tell from the bad weather and the lack of Iranian Scud missiles, this is not Dubai. But Canary Wharf and Dubai are more connected than you might think. Until 2022, the building behind me hosted employees at a company called UAE Exchange. As the name might suggest, the UAE Exchange's only operation was transferring money to and from the UAE. And yet, despite the fact that it shared that niche with dozens of businesses, the UAE Exchange had 9,000 employees and served 15 million customers, as well as having offices in some of the world's leading financial centres. In the UK, there's an entire cottage industry of transferring money to and from Dubai. And when you look at the numbers, that's not very surprising. Of the 11 million people living in the UAE, an astounding 89% are non-citizens. But even among them, there are more British citizens in the UAE than any other Western country. Before the strikes, 250,000 British citizens lived in the UAE, mainly Dubai. Many did so for tax purposes, so it probably isn't too surprising that Reform have chased after donors under the promise of an estimated $6.8 billion annual tax cut for wealthy immigrants.
250,000 Britons now living in Dubai alone, and that's why we've introduced the idea of the Britannia card, a one-off payment for non-doms to come back, settle here, and pay all the relevant tax on their UK income.
But what is a little surprising is just how far they've gone, and how little you've probably heard about it. In his interview with Arabian Business magazine, Richard Tice wasted no time playing to his audience, bringing up his family's long-standing business connections with Dubai. But in his pitch, Tice didn't just insist that Reform would cut taxes to please Dubai's wealthy, but that it would make Britain's government more like the one that his audience knew in the UAE. This admission, just like identical ones by his colleagues, were barely noted by the British media. There's a pretty good chance you haven't heard anything about this at all. And the reason why is pretty simple. Unless you're a member of Dubai's ultra-rich, it wasn't meant for you. Arabian Business itself is a Dubai-based magazine described by its owner ITP Media Group as the region's most prestigious business publication, dedicated to providing informed, insightful, and independent journalism for the Middle East's elite for more than 25 years. Tice was talking to that elite. and he appears to have done so fairly effectively. In that issue's foreword, the editor-in-chief, after reminding readers, possibly redundantly, to feel smug, praised Tice for realising that the solution to Britain's woes was to emulate what is happening in the UAE. But Dubai's wealthy elite isn't the only important actor giving reform a helping hand. That would be the UAE state itself. Last December, the Emirati government paid £10,000 for Farage to meet with the head of the UAE state oil company in Abu Dhabi, and perhaps just as importantly, to see Formula One. As of last January, Farage was reportedly attempting to arrange a meeting with the president of the UAE himself. So why does the UAE government want to have leverage over Reform UK? Well, whilst Emirati influence has reached its apex in recent years, it goes far further back than Farage alone. In fact, it goes all the way back to the skyscraper that hosts the UAE exchange. Ironically enough, that building, as well as most of the other surrounding skyscrapers, is owned by the Canary Wharf Group, a group which itself is partially owned by the Qatari government, a completely identical oil-rich slave-owning kleptocracy, which hates and is hated by the UAE for reasons that no one particularly understands. At some point in your life, you may have read an article in The Guardian or The Telegraph explaining to you that Qatar is a bad, evil Gulf dictatorship, whereas the UAE is a nice, freedom-loving Gulf dictatorship. Well, there's a pretty good chance that that article was written as part of a foreign influence campaign by the UAE government. From 2009, the Emirati government hired a PR company to feed pro-UAE, anti-Qatar stories to major British newspapers. This is not a lone example. The UAE view Britain as a useful ally, both economically and for their regional struggle against Qatar. As a result, they've engaged in countless campaigns to influence European, and particularly British, media. But unlike those journalists, we at The Beacon don't have a wealthy petrostate to pay our bills. We've been trying to get a Dubai oil baron, we'd even go for a Qatari or a Russian at this point, but they're just not responding to our texts. But I mean genuinely, the Beacon is new, and we're reliant on individual donations to keep this free and accessible for everyone. If you believe that good journalism should stand up for democracy, that it should tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable, then we would appreciate any donation that you could give. There's a link to our donation page in the top comment in the description. Otherwise, we would really appreciate it if you could give us a like and subscribe. But as demonstrated by the fact that you have, of course, just liked and subscribed, people don't really read anymore. So the UAE have spent quite a lot of money promoting their image on social media. Their greatest coup was, of course, Dubai Chocolate, where they just openly paid leading news outlets to run positive stories. In order to further build positive opinion for the leadership, they even, and I'm not making this up, made a Dubai chocolate in honour of the UAE Defence Minister Mohammed Al Maktoum, who is also, in standard UAE fashion, the Deputy Prime Minister and the son of Dubai's ruler. Obviously, an Emirati Defence Minister themed chocolate alone won't make countries support UAE strategic interests, but lobbying politicians probably will. So they do that. In America, UAE lobbying was instrumental in securing President Trump's support for the blockade of Qatar. But it's hard to think of a country where they've held greater ideological capture than Britain. Many on the British right know the UAE as a fierce supporter of secular forces in the region. But those secular forces aren't exactly very nice people. The UAE took part in the invasion and blockade of Yemen, they support a number of brutal dictatorships, and continue to be the main provider of vital weapons to the RSF in Sudan, an Arab supremacist anti-black militia who, along with its predecessor Janjaweed, are responsible for the killing of hundreds of thousands of minorities. Regardless, the UAE developed a reputation among British right-of-centre politicians and policymakers as both a vanguard against radical Islamism and a free market paradise. Figures from Prince Andrew to Tony Blair have been vital in creating a significant international lobbying channel. Politicians receive donations, all while being fed information from think tanks reliant on donations from the government, that promote the UAE as a bastion against Islamic extremism, and that support UK deployment to assist Emirati strategic interests. It was in this environment that in 2023, a billionaire property developer and Conservative Party donor by the name of Nick Candy gave an interview to Bloomberg. Praising the values of the UAE, he told listeners that wealthy Britons were fleeing to Dubai to escape crime, high taxes, and children, quote, being taught about transgender and stuff. He of course just happened to own the properties that he was telling Bloomberg that everyone wanted to move into. But soon it would become clear that Nick Candy's repeated calls for the government to copy Dubai were a lot more sincere than boosting demand for its property portfolio. And a lot more ambitious.
Then also, I would love to have leadership like that in this country, where politics aren't in the way and they actually make really good decisions and smart decisions fast. The problem is here, it takes forever.
Well, it's one of the oldest democracies.
And that's great. Democracies are great when you've got visionary leadership and you've got people all working together to get things done. It seems like for the last few years we've been all infighting.
In December 2024, Candy was appointed Treasurer to Reform UK and shortly after donated £1 million to the party, stating that he would additionally raise over £40 million through his connections. And that wasn't empty talk. Nick Candy knew people, one of them being a certain Jeffrey Epstein, who he dined with in 2004. But more broadly, Candy has extensive connections to wealthy business elites, particularly in his focus city of Dubai.
Is Reform now the party of millionaires and billionaires, Mr. Farage?
As much of that elite returns to Britain, their incentive to reshape British politics is only likely to grow. As well as the extensive financial connections, the degree of genuine ideological capture among Reform's politics is equally impressive. The Dubai-based Legatum Limited founded the Reform Sympathetic Prosperity Institute and is also the co-owner of GB News. And then there's the newspapers. In 2023, the UAE government attempted to acquire both the Spectator and the Telegraph, and found what would now be an unlikely enemy in Nigel Farage. Farage responded with an op-ed in the Telegraph itself, opposing the censorship that would come from the UAE government acquiring the newspaper, and going as far as to criticise its abysmal human rights record. Farage, before his leadership of Reform UK, seems like a different person. Last month, he reversed his position on UAE ownership of the Telegraph and the Spectator, saying that the UAE had been treated poorly when the government blocked its acquisition. This change of heart came 2 months after his meeting with Dubai-based donors. Most recently, of course, it's hard to see Farage's initial support for bombing Iran outside of the context of UAE and Israeli lobbying campaigns. In the 2010s, the sheikhs of the UAE could only have dreamed of the degree of influence that they now exert over Britain's most popular political party. So what does that fact actually mean in practice? I mean, sure, they want us to have a more UAE-aligned foreign policy, but what actual day-to-day aspects of British life would change if a Dubaified Reform was in charge of Britain? Well, from the number of publicly available statements made to donors and government officials, we can have a pretty good idea. Most obviously, oil. Reform believes that it can cut taxes for wealthy emigres by adopting Dubai's oil model in the North Sea.
Let's produce our own oil, our own gas in our own country.
That's maybe not too surprising, given the significant number of Reform donors with oil connections, and Farage's paid trip to meet the CEO of the UAE state oil company. And then there's crime. The UAE has a government that some would call authoritarian, they say, but there's no denying that it establishes law and order.
And for people from London who are increasingly worried about crime, these streets are genuinely safe.
Thank God.
So how does the UAE keep crime under control? Well, with what a lot of people call a surveillance state.
Is that because you have lots of policemen, or is it because you have tough penalties for
It's
those that break the law?
Yeah, it's a combination of factors, Nigel. I mean, we have a very serious zero tolerance for drug use, for example. We have some of the strongest penalties vis-a-vis that. But also we use technology to help enable us to curb crime, to prosecute it fervently, and to make sure that it doesn't perpetuate further. So the number of cameras in the streets, the way the police really integrates well with ministries of interior, with actually even local communities who would call in a crime to be able to find ways in which they can stay safe.
I think on law and order, a bit we can learn on back in the United Kingdom.
That surveillance state has been highly effective in monitoring political dissidents and suppressing potential opponents of the UAE's dictatorship. But there's really only one aspect of the UAE's government that Reform admires above others.
Those who break the law or can't look after themselves are simply imprisoned or deported. So they don't. I mean, is that a better society? A place that simply imprisons or deports people who break the law?
Well, I tell you what. What is a better society is if you're at a coffee shop and you, as a lady, you leave your handbag and your phone on the table. You go to the loo. Then you come back a few minutes later. Guess what? Your handbag's still there. Your phone's still there. And that is the sort of society we should aspire to. Where
So we
you walk
can
down,
learn. We can learn from Dubai.
I think we should. This is a problem we've got as a nation, as a political class. We're not prepared to learn enough from other nations that are getting it right.
It's hard to miss the envy with which Reform politicians look at the UAE immigration system. Reform generally claim...
Who said I'm an anti-migration party?
Well, you did yourself.
No, I didn't. I said the opposite. I said we're pro-controlling
Control.
immigration.
Right-leaning party.
So it's easy to see why they like the UAE. In the UAE, productive, i.e. rich, workers have access to longer-term visas. But if you're considered less productive, say you're a construction worker, then you need to prove your way just a little bit more. There are quite a bit more in that second group. Whilst the British are the largest Western segment of the UAE's 89% foreign population, non-Western groups primarily from developing countries dwarf them by millions. These workers can be deported for basically any reason. Their employers control their residency permits. It's not uncommon for employers to withhold these papers, preventing them from quitting their job. The UAE call this system kafala, or sponsorship in English, but most human rights organisations use another term: modern slavery. What is now the UAE has been a vital centre of international commerce long before the skyscrapers. But for most of its history, its most vital good was not oil, but people. For centuries, slaves from East Africa and India were imported to the Trucial Coast, and the pearls they harvested were exported. When the Trucial Coast became a de facto British protectorate in 1892, Britain mostly did nothing to even stop the importation of new slaves beyond a few symbolic crackdowns. As the Trucial Coast gained independence in 1971, discovering oil the same year, many speculated that the need for cheap expendable labour from slaves had ended, but the reverse was the case. The government wished to use that money on ambitious construction projects, and for that they'd need people. Cheap people. As international pressure to end slavery mounted, the emirs of the UAE were struck with a problem. How could they maintain a supply of cheap labour to build Dubai with slavery no more? They found an elegant solution. You probably don't need to be convinced that the kafala system is bad. The accusations of modern slavery by human rights groups became pretty notorious after the 2022 World Cup in neighbouring Qatar. But you may be surprised just how generally unopposed it is by public opinion. For a country where its own citizens are only the third largest nationality, there isn't a particularly strong anti-immigrant movement. But why would there be? Kafala workers don't have any political rights. They don't have access to public services, and they provide cheap disposable labour, while emirization laws give citizens preferential treatment in job recruitment. Many don't even see kafala workers, who generally live in different parts of cities. All of the features of kafala, the ease of deportation, the virtual impossibility of citizenship or long-term residency, are in theory designed to reduce immigration, or at least to reduce less productive immigration. In practice, they mean that when a migrant worker does get to Dubai, they are completely at the mercy of the company that hired them. Unions do not exist. How can they if the non-citizens that try to create them don't have employment rights and can just be fired or deported? Legal protections exist in theory to prevent worker abuse, but why would the government spend money on having a functioning legal structure for non-citizens with no political power when their exploitation keeps the economy in good shape? In every right-wing populist party, there's always been a tension between their business connections and their opposition to immigration. Business wants higher immigration, and their base decidedly does not. This tension has probably played out most recently in Italy's far-right government, which has overseen dramatic and showy clampdowns on refugees, whilst work visas expanded to record levels in 2023. But Dubai offers reform a new way of dealing with that tension. Generally, much of our immigration debate is focused on policies affecting who comes in and who comes out. Rarely does it talk about the impact of those policies on those who are already here. By limiting the rights of lower-wage migrant workers, reform can clamp down on immigration, all while increasing the leverage of companies over those migrant workers that remain. Though it's supposedly their single issue, understanding Reform's immigration policy can be surprisingly hard, with it often scattered between dozens of discrete headlines seeking announcements. But from the blueprint of Dubaification, a lot of them start to piece together. Reform would make citizenship harder to obtain and totally abolish indefinite leave to remain, thereby increasing the share of migrants dependent on short-term visas. And for that increased share of now non-permanent residents, their rights would recede further. Reform would repeal the Human Rights Act, which guarantees the rights of non-citizens, including freedom from forced labour and equal access to courts.
A British Bill of Rights.
And this British Bill of Rights would only apply to British citizens?
Yes.
So if you've lived here for 30 years but you're not actually a citizen, you have worse rights or fewer rights than somebody.
Isn't it interesting that before the Human Rights Act of 1998, actually the country was doing quite well. Public services were a lot better than they are now. The economy was growing at 2.5% to 3.5% a year.
Meanwhile, like Dubai, Reform are going to make it easier for ultra-wealthy migrants to come to the UK. As the push factor for migration increases due to conflict and climate change, in part caused by the types of policies Reform supports, it seems Britain may achieve the Dubaified vision of Reform's donors. Of an international Britain, but one that puts its citizens first. This has been a video about how Reform want to make Britain like Dubai, but some of their work's already been done for them. In 2012, the UK adopted a UAE-style tied visa system for domestic workers. As a result, in 2024, Britain had the highest level of migrant worker abuse in the world, according to the Business and Human Rights Centre. And that's because the same struggle that Reform faces of business versus public opinion has been playing out across parties. From the perspective of governments across Europe, regardless of ideology, immigration is more unpopular but more needed than ever. The solution of many has been to turn away from the old integrationist model, to a system the Financial Times calls Euro-Kafala, a model inspired by Dubai's. Most governments see a rollback of immigration altogether as an economic impossibility, but believe that by making it temporary, primarily through making it prohibitively difficult to become a citizen and reducing the rights of non-citizens, opinion will soften. It's hard not to see Britain inside that continental shift. Unless foreign labour suddenly becomes less in demand or immigration becomes less unpopular, policymakers increasingly believe that this is the only sustainable compromise between capital and public opinion. Britain's Dubaification, its steady transformation into, to borrow a term from Reform, a two-tiered society between citizens and non-citizens, may be Britain's direction, regardless of party. Thank you for watching The Beacon's first video. Again, if you want to help us make videos like this, please like, subscribe, or if you're able, donate. I'm biased, but I would strongly recommend that you do subscribe. We do have a lot of other good videos on the way that I'm very excited for. I mean, I say other good videos. If you thought that was bad, we have like other liberal woke propaganda on the way, I guess. Next week, our resident Peru expert Abdel is giving us a video on Peru's political crisis, and the week after that we're doing a video on the UK's housing crisis. The Beacon itself is a news project that I and a couple of other people are building, committed to standing up to democracy. If you're interested in becoming a contributor or have any other suggestions or questions, please email us at editorial@readthebeacon.org. That's editorial@readthebeacon.org. There's a link in the description. Otherwise, our Substack is linked below, along with all of our sources and our visual credits. Thanks for being with us at the start.